The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Hadrian Blackmore, Duke of Ashworth, returned to Thornhaven Manor unannounced. His boots echoed against the marble foyer as he shed his drenched greatcoat, water pooling on floors, polished to mirror perfection. The familiar scent of beeswax and hothouse flowers wrapped around him, but there was no comfort in it. This house had felt like a mausoleum for 2 years now. Beautiful, silent, empty. He should have sent word ahead. Protocol demanded it. But after 3 weeks in London, enduring his grandmother's relentless matchmaking schemes and Venetia Harcourt's suffocating attention, he'd craved the solitude of the countryside with desperate hunger. "Your Grace." Mr. Aldrich, the butler, appeared with the practiced calm of a man who'd served 3 generations of Blackmores, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, yes, but something else beneath it. Something that looked almost like panic. "We weren't expecting you until Thursday." Change of plans. Hadrian pulled off his gloves, scanning the foyer with the automatic assessment of a man accustomed to overseeing vast estates. "Is my sister here?" "Lady Calla is visiting the Whitfields until tomorrow evening, Your Grace." Good. He loved his sister, but her cheerful energy would have been exhausting tonight. What he wanted was silence, a glass of whiskey, and the oblivion of sleep. "Have Mrs. Pemberton prepare my rooms. I'll take supper there." "Of course, Your Grace. I'll inform her immediately." The butler's voice was steady, but his departure was too quick, almost hurried. Hadrian frowned but dismissed it. Servants had their own concerns, and their own small dramas. It wasn't his business unless it affected the household's operation. He moved toward the east corridor, intending to retreat to his study until his rooms were ready. The house was quieter than usual for early evening. Too quiet. Where were the footmen who normally attended the main halls? The maids who should be lighting the evening candles? A sound stopped him. Soft, rhythmic. The scrape of a brush against stone. He turned the corner toward the lesser-used gallery and froze. A woman knelt on the floor near the far windows, scrubbing the marble with mechanical precision. She wore the simple gray dress of a housemaid, her dark hair tucked beneath a white cap, her sleeves rolled to reveal forearms that moved with weary repetition. The fading daylight caught the angles of her face, hollowed by exhaustion, or sharpened by something that looked like hunger. His chest constricted. There was something in the way she held herself, even on her knees, something in the curve of her neck, the set of her shoulders. Familiar. Impossible. "You there," he said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. The woman's hand stilled on the brush, her spine straightened slowly, vertebra by vertebra, with a dignity that seemed incongruous with her position. She didn't turn immediately. It was as if she was gathering something. Courage, perhaps. Or armor. Then she lifted her head. The floor dropped beneath him. Those eyes. That face. Thinner now, yes. Harder. The softness he remembered replaced by something fierce and guarded. But unmistakably, impossibly, devastatingly her. Seren. His Seren. No. Not his. Not anymore. Not for 2 years. 3 months. And 17 days. Not since the night he'd stood in this very house and told her to leave. Not since he'd watched her walk out the door with nothing but a small valise and whatever fragments remained of her shattered dignity. His wife. His former wife. The woman he'd cast aside based on lies he'd been too blind and too proud to question. "Your Grace." Her voice was steady, but he caught the tremor beneath it. The flash of something in her eyes that might have been fear or fury or both. She rose to her feet in a single fluid motion, the scrub brush still clutched in her reddened hands. "I was told you weren't returning until Thursday." Words clogged in his throat. His mind screamed questions. What was she doing here? How long had she been here? Why was she dressed as a servant, scrubbing floors in the house where she'd once been Duchess? Serin. Her name tasted like ash and honey on his tongue. What in God's name? I'm called Nell here. She cut him off, her chin lifting. Nell Whitmore. I would appreciate if you'd address me as such, Your Grace. Or not at all. The latter would be preferable. The words landed like blows, clean, precise, designed to wound. Behind him he heard footsteps. Mrs. Pemberton's voice, high with barely concealed alarm. Your Grace, I can explain. She came seeking work 2 months ago, and I didn't realize until it was too late who she— Leave us! The command came out sharper than he intended. Your Grace, I must insist. I said, leave us. Silence, then retreating footsteps, reluctant but obedient. They were alone now. Hadrian and the woman he'd wronged more terribly than he'd ever wronged another living soul. The woman whose face had haunted his dreams and whose absence had hollowed out every corner of this grand, empty house. 2 months. The words scraped from his throat. You've been here for 2 months, and no one thought to inform me? I asked them not to. Serene's eyes held his, unflinching. I needed work. Your estate needed maids. It seemed a practical arrangement. Practical? The word exploded from him. You were the Duchess of Ashworth. You were my— I was nothing. Her voice cracked, just once, before she wrestled it back under control. You made that abundantly clear when you threw me out with nothing but the clothes on my back and accusations still ringing in my ears. The guilt hit him like a physical force. He'd known, somewhere deep in the parts of himself he'd tried to bury, and that what he'd done was monstrous. But seeing her here, like this, the proof of his cruelty written in her calloused hands and hollow cheeks, made it real in a way he couldn't escape. Seren, don't. She stepped back, the scrub brush held between them like a shield. Whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it. I'm here because I needed to eat, and your housekeeper was kind enough to offer work without asking too many questions. Kind enough? A bitter laugh escaped him. She hid you from me. She protected me from you. There's a difference. The words hung between them, sharp as shattered glass. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. 7 o'clock. The sky outside the windows had darkened to deep purple, shadows pooling in the corners of the gallery. I'm not going to dismiss you. Hadrian heard himself speak as if from a great distance. You'll stay. I don't want your charity. It isn't charity. It's— What? Penance? Guilt? The desperate need to keep her close now that he'd found her? To somehow undo the damage he'd spent 2 years pretending didn't exist? Footsteps echoed from the main corridor, lighter than Mr. Aldrich's measured tread. Sharper. The distinctive click of an ebony cane against marble. No. Not now. Please, God, not now. But the universe had never been particularly interested in Hadrian's prayers, and it certainly wasn't going to start answering them tonight. Hadrian, the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, appeared in the gallery doorway, silver-haired and imperious in black bombazine. Her gaze swept the scene with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. Her grandson, the scrub brush, the woman in servant's gray. Her eyes narrowed. So, she said, her voice cutting through the charged silence like a blade through silk. She's finally been discovered. I wondered how long it would take. The blood drained from Hadrian's face. His grandmother had known, and she had said nothing. The gallery had become a battlefield. Hadrian stared at his grandmother, disbelief and fury warring in his chest. You knew she was here. Of course I knew. The Dowager moved further into the gallery with the unhurried grace of someone who had never been questioned in her 8 decades of life. Mrs. Pemberton informed me the day she arrived. a former Duchess of Ashworth, scrubbing floors in her own household. The irony was too delicious to interrupt. Beside him, Seren had gone very still. Her face revealed nothing, but Hadrian caught the slight tremor in the hand that held the scrub brush. When she was afraid. The realization burned through him like acid. His wife, former wife, was afraid of his grandmother. And why wouldn't she be? It was his grandmother who had first presented the damning evidence. His grandmother who had insisted the marriage be dissolved quietly to avoid scandal. His grandmother who had assured him over and over that Seren was nothing but a fortune-hunting deceiver who had never loved him at all. And he had believed her. God help him. He had believed every word. Leave us. His grandmother's command was directed at Seren, dismissive as if she were speaking to a stray dog. Return to whatever hovel you've been sleeping in. We'll discuss your termination in the morning. She's not going anywhere. The words were out before Hadrian fully processed them. Both women turned to look at him. His grandmother with sharp surprise, Serene with something closer to suspicion. I beg your pardon? The dowager's voice could have frozen fire. You heard me. Hadrian moved without conscious thought, positioning himself between his grandmother and Seren. A barrier, a shield. Too little, too late, but something. She stays. Don't be absurd. She cannot remain here. Think of the scandal if anyone discovers what? That I cast out my wife based on evidence I never properly examined. That I destroyed an innocent woman's life because I was too proud to question accusations that should have been laughable from the start? Silence fell like a hammer blow. Behind him, he heard Seren's sharp intake of breath. His grandmother's face had gone rigid, a mask of painted porcelain that revealed nothing of the calculations surely spinning behind her eyes. Innocent. The dowager pronounced the word with delicate contempt. You saw the letters yourself. You read her correspondence with Lord Ashford. The intimacies they shared. Lord Ashford is a 73-year-old man, half-blind with gout in both legs, and a wife of 40 years, who never lets him out of her sight. Hadrian's voice was cold, controlled, hiding the earthquake beneath. I've had 2 years to reflect on the absurdity of those accusations, grandmother. 2 years to wonder how conveniently that evidence appeared just weeks after Seren discovered she might be with child. The scrub brush clattered to the floor. Hadrian turned. Seren's face had gone white, her eyes enormous in her thin face. How did you? Her voice broke. I never told anyone. I hadn't even confirmed. Mrs. Pemberton. The words came out hoarse. She mentioned it in her letter, informing me of your arrival here. She thought I should know that the circumstances of your departure were more complex than I'd been led to believe. The dowager's cane struck the marble with a sharp crack. This is precisely why servants should not involve themselves in family matters. The woman will be dismissed immediately. The woman has been in service to this family for 32 years. Hadrian didn't turn from Seren's face, from the tears that now tracked silently down her cheeks. The only person facing dismissal tonight, grandmother, is you. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Now he did turn, facing the woman who had shaped his entire existence with her iron will and ruthless pragmatism. The woman he'd trusted above all others. The woman who had destroyed his marriage without a flicker of remorse. Return to the dower house. Tonight. I'll have your things sent in the morning. For the first time in his memory, his grandmother appeared genuinely stunned. Her composure cracked, just slightly, revealing something almost like fear beneath. You cannot mean to resurrect this foolishness. She was entirely unsuitable. A merchant's granddaughter, with no breeding, no connections. No, she was my wife. The word tore from him like a wound reopening. She was carrying my child. and you drove her out into the streets with nothing but lies and schemes because she wasn't good enough for your precious bloodline. The child was never confirmed, and even if it had been, get out. 3 words: quiet, final, devastating. The dowager held his gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, something that might have been understanding or might have been the beginning of war. Then she turned, her skirt sweeping the marble with a whisper of silk, and walked away without another word. Her footsteps faded into silence. Hadrian and Seren stood alone in the darkened gallery, 2 years of pain and betrayal coiling between them like smoke. The child. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the answer in her eyes. What happened to... There was no child. Her voice was hollow, empty. I lost it 3 weeks after I left, in a boarding house in Liverpool, alone. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. There was no physician, no midwife, but just blood and pain and the end of everything. Seren retrieved the scrub brush from the floor with mechanical precision. I survived. Obviously. And then I found work where I could. Cleaned houses for families who had no idea I'd once had a household of my own. Eventually, I came here. Why? The question scraped from him like broken glass. Why here, of all places? She looked at him then, and the devastation in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. Because I had nowhere else to go. Because my family is dead, my connections are severed, and the name you gave me has been dragged through so much mud that no decent household would employ me if they knew the truth. Her laugh was bitter, broken. The irony is that I'm safer here, invisible in plain sight, than anywhere else in England. Your grandmother's campaign to destroy me was so thorough that no one believes the ruined Duchess of Ashworth would ever dare return to the scene of her supposed crimes. Hadrian closed his eyes against the wave of self-loathing that threatened to drown him. He had done this. His blindness, his pride, his willingness to believe the worst of the woman he'd promised to protect and cherish. Every tragedy that had befallen her could be traced directly back to his failure. I'm going to fix this. She laughed again, that same broken sound that wasn't really laughter at all. There's nothing to fix, Your Grace. What's done is done. All I want now is to be left in peace to earn my wages, and you're not a servant. He crossed to her in 3 strides, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat, but the way her breath quickened, despite the steel in her spine. You were never a servant. You were the Duchess of Ashworth, and you will be treated accordingly. I was the Duchess of Ashworth. She stepped back, maintaining distance. For 11 months and 12 days, until your grandmother convinced you I was a faithless whore and you threw me out like garbage. I was wrong. Yes. No forgiveness in the word. No softening. You were. Seren, please. I'll stay. She cut him off, her voice hardening into something that almost resembled her old strength. Not because you've ordered it, but because I have nowhere else to go and winter is coming. But I'm not your Duchess anymore, Hadrian. I'm not your anything. And if you think a few pretty words of regret are going to erase 2 years of hell, you understand nothing about what you destroyed. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the empty gallery, leaving him alone with his ghosts. The portrait of his father watched from the wall, disapproving even in death. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with quiet finality. She was still here, still within reach, but the distance between them stretched wider than oceans, and Hadrian had no idea how to cross it, only that he had to try. Morning came gray and unforgiving. Hadrian hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study, staring at the fire as it burned down to embers, turning over memories like a man examining wounds. The first time he'd seen Seren at a London assembly, her laughter bright as bells. Their wedding day, when she'd trembled as she spoke her vows, but met his eyes with such fierce hope. The night she'd told him, hesitantly, hopefully, that her courses were late. And then the night everything shattered. The letters, his grandmother's carefully modulated horror, the evidence that had seemed so damning at the time. Serin's face when he'd confronted her, not with questions, but with accusations. Her denials, increasingly desperate, that he'd dismissed as manipulations. "I trusted you." Those had been her last words before she left. Not "I hate you." Not "how could you." Just those 3 words, weighted with devastation that had haunted him every night since. "I trusted you." And he had failed her in every way a man could fail. A knock at the study door pulled him from his spiral. "Enter." Mr. Aldrich appeared, his face carefully neutral. "Your Grace, Mrs. Pemberton requests an audience, and Lady Calla has returned early from the Whitfields. She's asking to see you as well." Of course she was. News traveled fast in households. His sister would have heard about the previous night's confrontation before she'd even removed her traveling cloak. "Send in Mrs. Pemberton first, then Lady Calla." The housekeeper entered with the careful steps of someone approaching a wild animal. She was a handsome woman in her middle 50s, her gray hair neat beneath a white cap, her face lined with 32 years of service. "Your Grace," she curtsied deeply, "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me rather more than that." Hadrian remained seated. "You concealed my wife's presence in this house for 2 months." "Yes, Your Grace." "On my grandmother's orders?" A pause. Then quietly, "On my own conscience, Your Grace." That surprised him. Explain." Mrs. Pemberton's hands twisted together. "When she arrived seeking work, I almost didn't recognize her. She was so thin, so worn. But the moment she spoke, I knew. I'd helped dress her on her wedding day. I'd seen her transformation from a nervous bride to a gracious duchess who treated every servant with kindness and genuine respect." She drew a breath, steadying herself. "I knew what the Dowager had done. Not the specifics, but enough. I'd seen the letters before they were presented to you. I'd noticed how conveniently they appeared, how perfectly they confirmed every suspicion her Grace had been planting for months. And I'd watched the former Duchess's face when she was accused. That wasn't the face of a guilty woman, Your Grace. That was the face of someone whose world was being destroyed, while the one person who should have protected her stood by and let it happen." Each word was a blade. Hadrian accepted them as his due. "You should have told me she was here." "Perhaps." Mrs. Pemberton met his eyes with directness that bordered on insubordination. "But she begged me not to. And after what she'd suffered, I couldn't bring myself to betray the only peace she'd found. She works harder than any maid I've ever employed. She never complains. She asks for nothing but her wages and a small room where she can sleep without fear." Without fear. The phrase lodged in his chest like a splinter. "Where is she now?" "In the servants' quarters. She was awake before dawn trying to resume her duties. I've instructed her to wait there until this matter is resolved." Hadrian rose, moving to the window. Outside, the gardens stretched in ordered rows, beautiful and lifeless in the gray morning light. "She stays, but not as a servant. Your Grace?" "I want her moved to the blue guest suite in the East Wing. She'll be treated as a guest of the household until I determine how to proceed." He turned to face the housekeeper. "You'll see to it personally. Provide her with appropriate clothing, anything she needs. If she refuses, inform her that I'm not asking." "She will refuse, Your Grace." Mrs. Pemberton's voice held warning. "She has a great deal of pride. Perhaps more now than before, because it's all she has left. Then find a way to make her accept. Tell her that I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I'm trying to ensure she doesn't suffer unnecessarily while we determine what comes next." "And what does come next, Your Grace?" It was a question far above the housekeeper's station, but Hadrian answered it anyway. I don't know, but she's not scrubbing floors anymore. Not in my house. Not anywhere. Mrs. Pemberton curtsied and departed, leaving him alone for exactly 30 seconds before his sister exploded through the door. Is it true? Lady Calla Blackmore was 22 years old, dark-haired like her brother, but with none of his restraint. She practically vibrated with emotion. Seren is here. She's been here for months, and no one told me? Apparently, it was a well-kept secret. I can't believe. Calla stopped, her expression shifting from outrage to something softer. Is she all right? Mrs. Pemberton said she was working as a maid. A maid, Hadrian. She was the kindest duchess this house has ever seen, and she's been scrubbing our floors. I'm handling it. Handling it how? By brooding in your study? Calla crossed her arms. I always knew something was wrong with grandmother's accusations. Seren loved you. Truly loved you. Not your title or your money. Anyone with eyes could see it. And you just believed those ridiculous letters without even... I know. Do you? Because I've spent 2 years watching you pretend none of it ever happened. Watching you let grandmother parade eligible ladies through the house as if your wife never existed. As if you didn't destroy an innocent woman because you were too cowardly to question your own grandmother. The word cowardly struck home. Calla had always been the only person who dared speak truth to him. I'm going to make this right. How? The challenge in his sister's voice was unmistakable. She's been surviving on her own for 2 years, building a life without you. Why would she possibly want you back in it? I don't know that she would. The admission cost him. But I have to try. Calla studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, some of the tension drained from her shoulders. Good. Because if you hurt her again, brother, I'll make grandmother's schemes look like kindness. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'm going to see her, with or without your permission. Calla, she was my friend, the only duchess in this family's history who treated me like a person instead of a marriageable asset. I should have fought harder for her. I should have questioned grandmother's evidence. I should have... Her voice broke. I should have done a lot of things. We both should have. She left before he could respond. Hadrian stood alone in the gray morning light, the weight of his failures pressing down like a physical force. Then he walked out of the study, toward the servants' quarters. He found Seren standing outside a tiny room that must have been her lodging for the past 2 months. She was dressed in the same gray servant's uniform, her face composed into careful blankness. Mrs. Pemberton stood nearby. I'm not accepting your charity. The words came out before he'd even spoken. I earned my place here. I'll continue earning it. You were the Duchess of Ashworth. I was. Past tense. Her chin lifted. Now I'm a maid who works hard and causes no trouble. I don't need your guilt, your pity, or your sudden attack of conscience. It's not sudden. He moved closer, and she tensed, but held her ground. I've been drowning in conscience for 2 years. I just didn't have the courage to face it. And now you do? How convenient, when I'm standing in your house with nowhere else to go. That's precisely why this needs to be your choice. He kept his voice low. I'm asking you to stay, not as a servant, as a guest while we discuss matters. What matters? Our marriage was dissolved. Legally, thoroughly, scandalously. There's nothing to discuss. There's everything to discuss. The evidence against you, where it came from, why I was fool enough to believe it. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear? Hope? Well, I'm not interested in relitigating the past. Then help me understand the present. He stepped closer still, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat. You came here. Of all the houses in England, you chose this one. Why? Her composure cracked, just slightly. I told you. I had nowhere else. You could have gone anywhere. Found work in any city where no one knew your face. Instead, you walked back into the place where you were most likely to be discovered. The place where you were most vulnerable. His voice dropped. Why, Saran? Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Because I wanted to see if it still felt like home. The admission came out barely above a whisper. Because despite everything, this house was the only place I was ever truly happy. And I thought if I could be here, even as a servant, I'm even invisible, maybe I could remember what that felt like, before everything fell apart. The confession undid something inside him. Stay, he said. Not as a servant, not as a guest. Stay and let me prove that I understand what I destroyed. Let me try to make amends, even knowing I can never fully succeed. Why should I? Because I loved you. The words fell between them like stones into still water. I still love you. I never stopped, not even when I thought the worst of you. And I know that doesn't excuse anything that my love was worth nothing when it couldn't protect you from my own blindness. But it's the truth. Serene's face had gone very still. You can't expect me to forgive you. I don't expect anything. I'm just asking for the chance to be worthy of forgiveness someday, however long that takes. She studied him for an endless moment. He couldn't read her expression, couldn't tell if she was going to slap him, or cry, or simply walk away without another word. The blue guest suite, she said finally. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned it. Yes, I have conditions. Despite everything, he almost smiled. She'd had conditions the first time, too. 3 of them, negotiated with the ferocity of a seasoned diplomat. He'd been enchanted by her spine from the very beginning. Name them. First, I maintain my dignity. I'm not a charity case or a penitent project. If I stay, it's as an equal, not a patient in your hospital for wounded pride. Agreed. Second, your grandmother stays away from me, completely. If I see her in the hallway, she crosses to the other side. If she speaks to me, I reserve the right to respond however I see fit. A harder promise. But he nodded. Agreed. Third, she met his eyes, and the steel there made his heart ache. You tell me the truth, all of it, about the letters, about who created them, about why. If we're going to discuss matters, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Agreed. He extended his hand. Do we have an arrangement? She looked at his outstretched palm for a long moment. Then, slowly, she placed her work-worn hand in his. We have an arrangement. But Hadrian, she tightened her grip, her gaze unwavering. If you betray me again, if you lie to me, or deceive me, or let anyone hurt me, I will walk out of this house and disappear so thoroughly that not even God himself will be able to find me. Do you understand? I understand. She released his hand. Then I suppose I'm a guest of Thornhaven Manor. Again. She turned and walked toward the main house without looking back, and Hadrian watched her go with the terrifying certainty that he'd just been given one final chance at redemption. And if he failed this time, there would be no mercy left. The blue guest suite was exactly as Seren remembered it. Pale silk wallpaper, a 4-poster bed draped in embroidered damask, windows overlooking the east gardens, where roses had once bloomed in profusion, and where, she knew, only bare thorns remained in this late autumn chill. She'd stayed in this room once before, for 3 days, as a nervous bride-to-be waiting for her wedding. She remembered lying awake in that massive bed, too excited to sleep, imagining the life that awaited her as the Duchess of Ashworth. Foolish girl. But Pemberton had laid out clothing on the bed, not the elaborate gowns of a duchess, but respectable day dresses in soft wool and cotton. Simple. Practical. The wardrobe of a gentlewoman fallen on hard times, which, Serene supposed, was exactly what she was. These belonged to Lady Calla before she declared them out of fashion. Mrs. Pemberton smoothed an invisible wrinkle from a dove-gray morning dress. She's taller than you, but I've had them altered. They should fit well enough until we can arrange for new things. I don't need new things. His Grace insists. Serene turned from the window, her jaw tight. His Grace doesn't get to insist on anything regarding my wardrobe. Our arrangement was for dignity, not decoration. The housekeeper's face softened with something that looked painfully like sympathy. He's trying, my lady. In his own fumbling way, he's trying. Don't call me that. The title felt like a wound reopening. I'm not a lady, not anymore. You'll always be a lady. Mrs. Pemberton moved toward the door. Regardless of what any court document claims, some things can't be taken away, no matter how hard cruel people try. She left before Serene could respond. Alone, Serene sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure cracking in the solitude. How many times had she imagined returning to this house? In her darkest moments, scrubbing floors in strangers' kitchens, sleeping in rooms barely larger than closets, she dreamed of walking through Thornhaven's halls again, of being seen, of being remembered, but never like this. Never as an object of pity, dressed in another woman's cast-offs and dependent on the mercy of the man who'd shattered her life. She pressed her palms against her eyes, forcing back the tears. She would not cry. She'd stopped crying 18 months ago in a Liverpool boarding house when she'd realized that tears changed nothing and no one was coming to save her. If she wanted to survive, she'd have to save herself. And she had. She'd worked until her hands bled and her back screamed. She'd learned to be invisible, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to exist in the margins of other people's lives. She'd rebuilt herself from the wreckage of everything she'd lost. Now Hadrian wanted to give it all back. The comfort, the status, the life she'd been robbed of. But could she trust him? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Serene. Calla's voice, hesitant through the heavy oak. May I come in? She wiped her eyes quickly. Yes. The door opened to reveal Hadrian's younger sister, her face a complicated map of emotions. Guilt, hope, uncertainty. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, Calla said, hovering in the doorway. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. Why? You didn't accuse me of adultery. No. Calla stepped inside, closing the door behind her. But I didn't defend you either. I was 19, terrified of grandmother, and I let my silence become complicity. I've never forgiven myself for that. Something eased in Serene's chest. An easing, slight, but real. You were young. I was a coward. Calla crossed to stand before her. You were my friend. My only real friend in this whole gilded prison. And when they came for you, I hid in my room and did nothing. What could you have done? I don't know. Something. Anything. The tears spilled over. See why I'm so sorry, Serene. For all of it. For what grandmother did. For what Hadrian believed. For what you've suffered since. Serene hadn't expected this. But Calla's genuine grief, the raw ache of a friendship severed, caught her off guard. I forgive you. The words came out rough, rusty with disuse. You were collateral damage. We both were. Calla let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, then pulled Serene into an embrace so fierce it stole her breath. I'm going to help you, Calla whispered against her hair. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. For the first time in 2 years, Serene allowed herself to be held. And for just a moment, the loneliness receded. But even as warmth spread through her chest, a darker thought surfaced. Calla didn't know everything. None of them did. The letters were only part of the story. And somewhere in this house, evidence of a far more dangerous secret remained hidden. If it was found, forgiveness would be the least of her concerns. 2 days passed in fragile truce. Seren wore the borrowed dresses. She ate meals in her room, refusing to join the family at table, despite Kala's gentle urging. She walked the grounds in early morning when the household was still sleeping, relearning paths she'd once wandered as mistress of this estate. Hadrian kept his distance. She saw him occasionally, crossing the entrance hall or riding out to inspect the tenant farms. He always nodded, giving her the space she'd silently demanded. It couldn't last. On the 3rd morning, Seren descended the main staircase to find a carriage in the drive, and voices echoing from the drawing room. "Absolutely outrageous," a woman was saying, on her tone sharp with aristocratic disdain. Venetia heard from Lady Pemberton, who heard from her cousin's maid that the former Duchess has returned. Returned and been installed in the guest wing as if nothing ever happened. Serene froze on the landing, hidden from view, but able to hear everything. "Lady Thornwood," Hadrian's voice, cool and controlled. "I appreciate your concern for my household, but I fail to see how my guest arrangements are any business of the ton." Any business? A laugh, brittle as breaking glass. The woman was publicly denounced as an adulteress. Your grandmother circulated the evidence herself. If you think society has forgotten, society may remember whatever it pleases. I'm not asking for anyone's approval. Clearly not. Or you'd have considered how this reflects on your family, on your prospects. The Harcourt girl has been telling everyone you're practically betrothed, and now she'll hear that you've taken back your disgraced wife like some sort of sentimental fool. Serene's hands clenched. Venetia Harcourt. She didn't know the name, but she understood the implication. Hadrian had been courting someone, perhaps seriously, and now that courtship was complicated by her presence. "Miss Harcourt is mistaken about the nature of our acquaintance," Hadrian said. "As are you, Lady Thornwood, about the nature of your welcome here. Good day." Footsteps, the drawing room door opening. Seren turned to retreat back up the stairs, but she was too slow. The woman emerged into the foyer and looked up, her sharp eyes finding Seren on the landing like a hawk spotting prey. Lady Thornwood was perhaps 50, elegantly dressed in burgundy velvet. Her silver-streaked hair swept beneath an elaborate hat. Her face bore the particular cruelty of someone who had never suffered consequences. Well, the word dripped with contempt. The infamous Seren Blackmore, or should I say Seren Whitley. I understand you've been using your maiden name while scrubbing floors for your living. Heat flooded Seren's face, but she forced herself to descend the remaining stairs with composure. "Lady Thornwood, I don't believe we've been introduced. We have, actually, at your wedding breakfast, though I suppose you were too giddy with triumph to notice anyone beneath the rank of Earl." The accusation was absurd. Serene had spoken to every guest that day, including Lady Thornwood's own daughter. "I remember your daughter," Seren said quietly. "Miss Honoria. She told me she hoped to become a botanist. I sent her a book on the subject the following week. I wonder if she ever received it." Something flickered in Lady Thornwood's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "My daughter's interests are none of your concern." "Of course not. I simply wondered." The front door remained open. Hadrian stood beside it, watching the exchange. Lady Thornwood drew herself up, rallying. "Whatever sympathy you're attempting to generate, it won't work. The evidence against you was clear. The Duke may have lost his senses, but society remembers what you are." "And what is that, Lady Thornwood?" Serene kept her voice steady. "What exactly am I?" "A fortune hunter, a deceiver, a woman who spread her legs for Lord Ashford while her husband's back was turned." The vulgarity hung in the air like poison. Lady Thornwood, Hadrian's voice cracked like a whip. You will leave. Mona, I'm simply stating facts. You're stating lies. Lies that I was fool enough to believe once, but never again. He moved toward her, and for the first time, Serene saw the full force of ducal authority unleashed. Lord Ashford was 73 years old, half-blind, riddled with gout, and devoted to his wife of 4 decades. The letters implicating my wife were forgeries, planted by someone in this household to destroy a marriage that threatened their plans. Lady Thornwood's face paled. That's impossible. The Dowager herself is no longer welcome under this roof, and anyone who repeats her slander will find themselves similarly unwelcome in any house, any ballroom, any establishment where the Duke of Ashworth holds influence. He opened the front door wider, which, as I'm sure you're aware, defies most of them. The threat was unmistakable. Lady Thornwood gathered her skirts with trembling hands. You've lost your mind. This scandal will destroy the Blackmore name. The Blackmore name survived the Civil War, the Restoration, and my great-grandfather's gambling debts. It will survive this. Hadrian's smile was cold as winter. Good day, Lady Thornwood. Do give my regards to Honoria. She fled. The door closed behind her with a solid thunk. Silence filled the foyer, broken only by the grandfather clock. Serene released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her knees felt weak. That was unforgivable. Hadrian turned to face her. She had no right to speak to you that way. She said what everyone thinks. Then everyone is wrong. He crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes. I know I can't erase what my silence cost you. I know that defending you now, after 2 years of letting the lies stand, is a pittance against the debt I owe. But I will not let anyone in my presence speak of you with disrespect. Not ever again. Her chest ached with unexpected emotion. The letters, she said. You called them forgeries. They were. How do you know? Because I've spent the past 2 years examining every piece of evidence my grandmother presented. The handwriting analysis, the dates, the supposed witnesses. None of it holds up under scrutiny. I was too blind with jealousy and too quick to believe the worst. But the truth was always there. I simply refused to see it. Who forged them? I don't know. Not yet. His jaw tightened. But I intend to find out. The clock chimed 11 bells. There's something else, Serene said slowly. Something I should tell you about the night I left. Hadrian went very still. What about it? I didn't leave empty-handed. The confession scraped from her throat. I took something from your grandmother's study, something she didn't want anyone to find. What was it? Documents, letters, records of payments to someone I didn't recognize. She met his eyes. I never read them properly. I was too frightened, too desperate to escape. I hid them before I left the estate. But they're still here, Hadrian. Whatever your grandmother was hiding, the proof is still in this house. His expression shifted from shock to something fiercer, something almost like hope. Where? I'll show you. Tonight, when the household is asleep. Why not now? She glanced toward the drawing room, where servants might be listening. Because I don't know who to trust, and neither should you. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her heart racing with the weight of secrets finally beginning to surface. Whatever was in those hidden documents, it had been worth killing a marriage to protect, and Serene was about to find out why. The household settled into uneasy darkness. Serene waited in her room, fully dressed, watching the moon rise over the eastern gardens. The clock had struck midnight an hour ago. The servants would be asleep. The family retired. only the night footman remained awake, dozing in the entrance hall. A soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Hadrian in the corridor, dressed simply in dark wool, and a single candle in his hand. The flickering light carved shadows across his face, making him look younger somehow. More like the man she'd married, and less like the Duke who'd condemned her. "Ready?" he whispered. "Follow me." She led him through corridors she still remembered, down servants' stairs, through a passage connecting the main house to the older wing where his grandmother had maintained her private study. "She's at the Dower House," Hadrian murmured. "The study's been locked since she left." "I know where the key is." She found it where it had always been hidden, in a hollow space behind a particular portrait of the third Duke. His grandmother had thought herself so clever. She'd never imagined that a merchant's granddaughter might be observant enough to notice her secrets. The study door opened with a soft click. Inside, the room was exactly as Seren remembered. Heavy curtains, walls lined with ledgers, a massive desk where the dowager had plotted the destruction of her son's marriage. "The documents I took came from that cabinet." Seren pointed to an ornate wooden piece near the window. "But the ones I hid are somewhere else." She moved to the fireplace, kneeling beside the mantel. Her fingers found the loose stone she remembered, third from the right, worn smooth by years of concealment. She pulled, and the stone came free, revealing a dark hollow behind. "I wrapped them in oilcloth," she said, reaching inside. "I was afraid of fire, of water, of anything that might destroy them before—" Her fingers closed on the package, still there after 2 years. "Before what?" Hadrian asked. "So before I found someone I could trust to understand what they meant." She withdrew the packet and carried it to the desk. Hadrian set down his candle, providing light as she unwrapped the layers of protective cloth. Inside were letters, dozens of them, along with receipts, records of bank transactions, and correspondence with a solicitor. "I couldn't read them properly that night," Seren said. "I was crying too hard. All I understood was that they involved money, large sums of it, and a name I didn't recognize." Hadrian picked up the first letter, scanning it quickly. His face went pale. "This is addressed to my grandmother, from a Mr. Cornelius Black." He looked up. "The man who handled my father's estate after he died." "I don't understand." Neither did I. He set down the letter and picked up another, then another, his expression growing darker with each page. "These are records of financial transactions, transfers from my father's personal accounts to an external fund. Significant amounts, starting 3 years before his death." "What kind of fund?" "I don't know." He turned to the bank receipts. "But these payments continued after he died, after I became Duke. Someone was siphoning money from the estate, and my grandmother was facilitating it." Seren's mind raced. Could that be why she wanted me gone? I was starting to review the household accounts. You remember. I wanted to understand how the estate functioned. She told you I was overstepping. "I remember." Hadrian's voice was hollow. "She said you were attempting to control finances above your station. I found a discrepancy 3 weeks before the letters appeared. I mentioned it to Mrs. Pemberton, asked if there might be an explanation." Their eyes met across the scattered documents. "She knew you'd discovered something," Hadrian said slowly. "So she manufactured a reason to remove you before you could investigate further." The truth settled over them like a shroud. "I was never unfaithful to you." Serene's voice cracked despite her efforts to control it. "I never even looked at another man, but I was asking questions she couldn't afford to have answered." "Serene, I loved you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I loved you so completely that when you believed those lies, it broke something fundamental in me. Not just my heart. my ability to trust that love meant anything at all. Hadrian set down the documents. His hands were trembling. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, you don't. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it anyway. He moved toward her slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't. I remember the first time I saw you, he said quietly, at the Westbrook Assembly. You were standing near the windows, arguing with your cousin about whether Shakespeare or Marlowe was the superior playwright. You were eavesdropping. I was captivated. He stopped an arm's length away. You were so passionate, so certain of your opinions, so completely unimpressed by the lords circling you. When I asked you to dance, you told me your card was full. It was full. You made space for me anyway. You were persistent. I was in love. He said it simply, without drama. From that first moment. I didn't know your name or your station or anything about you, except that I wanted to hear you argue about playwrights for the rest of my life. Serene's eyes burned with unshed tears. That man seems very far away now. He was buried under grief and pride, and the manipulations of someone he should never have trusted. Hadrian reached out, slowly, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. But he's still here. Still in love with you. Still desperate to hear you argue about anything at all. She should pull away, should maintain the walls she'd spent 2 years building. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. I can't just forget what happened. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me prove that it will never happen again. How? By finding out the full truth about what my grandmother did. By making her answer for every lie, every manipulation, every moment of suffering she caused you. His eyes held hers, fierce with conviction. And by showing you, every single day, that I see you. Not the merchant's granddaughter, or the disgraced duchess, or the woman who scrubbed floors to survive. You, Serene. The only person who ever made me feel like being a duke wasn't a prison sentence. She was crying now. She couldn't help it. I don't know if I can trust you again. Then let me earn your trust, day by day, moment by moment, however long it takes. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Serene looked at the documents spread across the desk, at the proof of conspiracy that had destroyed her life, at the man who had failed her so completely and was now offering everything he had to make amends. We should keep investigating, she said finally. There's more here. More than either of us understands yet. Tomorrow. Tonight. I won't be able to sleep anyway. Then we do it together. They sat side by side at the dowager's desk, sorting through papers by candlelight, piecing together the puzzle of betrayal that had nearly destroyed them both. At some point, Serene's head grew heavy. She didn't remember leaning against Hadrian's shoulder, didn't remember her eyes closing. But when she woke, dawn light was streaming through the windows, and she was wrapped in his coat, curled on the small settee near the fireplace. Hadrian sat at the desk, still, dark circles under his eyes, surrounded by organized stacks of evidence. You should have woken me, she said, sitting up. You needed sleep. He looked up, and something in his face made her breath catch. Besides, I found something. What? He held up a letter, his face grim. My grandmother wasn't working alone. She had a partner. Someone inside this house who helped forge the evidence against you. Someone who's still here. The warmth of waking vanished, replaced by ice. Who? Hadrian set down the letter. I don't know yet. But whoever it is, they know we're looking. And they're going to do everything in their power to stop us from finding the truth. Outside the study window, a figure moved quickly away from the house. Someone had been watching, and now they knew everything. The Whitfield Harvest Ball arrived like a storm on the horizon. Serene had hoped to avoid it entirely. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery in the Dowager's study, and 3 weeks of careful investigation and growing tension. But Calla insisted with particular determination. "You can't hide forever," she said, standing in Serene's doorway, with a gown of midnight blue silk draped over her arms. "Society needs to see you. They need to see you with Hadrian, standing tall, proving that every vicious rumor was wrong. Society doesn't need anything from me. Perhaps not. But you need this." Calla laid the gown across the bed. "You need to reclaim what was stolen, not just your reputation, your courage." The words struck deeper than Serene wanted to admit. She'd been brave once, bold enough to argue with dukes at assemblies, to negotiate her own marriage terms, to question household accounts. That woman felt like a stranger now, buried under years of survival and fear. What if they won't accept me? Then they'll answer to the Duke of Ashworth, and to me. Calla's smile was fierce. We Blackmores are rather good at making life uncomfortable for our enemies. The Whitfield estate blazed with candlelight as their carriage approached. Serene's hands trembled inside her gloves. The midnight silk felt like armor, but armor could be pierced. "Breathe." Hadrian's voice was low beside her. "I'm right here." "That's what I'm afraid of." He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "People will talk. They'll say you've lost your senses, taking back a disgraced wife. They'll say, I've bewitched you or trapped you. Let them say whatever they please." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I spent 2 years caring about what people said, following my grandmother's counsel, being the proper, respectable duke everyone expected. And all it brought me was misery and the loss of the only person who ever mattered." The carriage rolled to a stop. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Neither am I." They stepped out together. The Whitfield ballroom was a glittering sea of silk and jewels, hundreds of faces turning toward the entrance as the Duke of Ashworth was announced. And beside him, unnamed but unmistakable, the woman everyone had been whispering about for weeks. Serene felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure, curiosity, contempt, fascination. She squared her shoulders and walked forward on Hadrian's arm, refusing to cower. "They're looking," she murmured. "Let them look." His grip on her arm tightened slightly. "You're magnificent." Lady Whitfield approached first, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace." And, "Mrs. I'm Blackmore." "Miss Whitley," Serene corrected quietly. The marriage was dissolved. "Of course." Lady Whitfield's eyes flickered with calculation. "How unexpected to see you here." "Miss Whitley is my guest." Hadrian's voice carried ducal authority. "I trust she'll be treated with the courtesy due to any friend of the Blackmore family." The implication was clear. Challenge her, and you challenge me. Lady Whitfield smiled thinly. "Of course, Your Grace. Do enjoy the evening." They moved into the ballroom proper, navigating a sea of curious faces. Serene recognized some of them, women who had attended her wedding breakfast, lords who had danced at her anniversary ball, people who had smiled to her face while her world crumbled. "The vultures are circling." Calla appeared at her elbow. "Lady Thornwood has been telling everyone that Hadrian's gone mad, and Venetia Harcourt is in the corner, looking murderous." "Venetia Harcourt." Serene glanced toward where Calla indicated. A beautiful blonde woman in rose silk stood with a cluster of admirers, her smile frozen, her eyes fixed on Hadrian. "Tell me about her." "She's been pursuing Hadrian since last season. Grandmother practically threw them together at every opportunity. Venetia was convinced they'd be engaged by Christmas. Were they close?" "He tolerated her." Calla shrugged. "Which for Hadrian is practically enthusiasm. But he never looked at her the way he looks at you. Not once." Before Serene could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Hadrian appeared before her, hand extended. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as they took the floor. Seren could feel every eye tracking them. The Duke of Ashworth, dancing with his disgraced former wife in public for all the world to see. "You're trembling," Hadrian said quietly. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of hoping this is real, of letting myself believe that things could be different." His hand tightened at her waist. "It's real. Whatever happens tonight, whatever anyone says, this is real." They moved together with the ease of two people who had once danced 100 times, whose bodies remembered each other. The music swelled around them, and for a moment, Seren let herself pretend. Pretend that the last 2 years hadn't happened. Pretend that she was still the hopeful bride who'd married for love. The final notes faded too quickly, so applause scattered through the ballroom, polite but uncertain. Hadrian bowed over her hand, and Seren curtsied, and for one shining moment, it felt like victory. Then Venetia Harcourt appeared. "Your Grace." Her voice was sugar over poison. "What a charming display. Though I confess, I'm surprised to see you dancing with the help." The words landed like a slap. Seren went very still. Around them, conversation ceased. "Miss Harcourt," Hadrian's voice was ice. "I believe you've made a mistake." "Have I?" Venetia's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Everyone knows she was working as a maid in your household. Scrubbing floors, I heard. How very industrious." "She was a guest." "A guest who arrived in servant's grey and slept in the servants' quarters?" Venetia laughed. "Please, Your Grace, don't insult our intelligence. You've taken pity on your former mistake. It's almost admirable, in a pathetic sort of way." Serene's face burned. She wanted to flee, to disappear, to escape this public humiliation. But then she remembered something. Mrs. Pemberton's words. "You'll always be a lady." Calla's words. "Fight for this." Hadrian's words. "You're magnificent." She drew herself up. "Miss Harcourt," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "I understand your disappointment. You believed yourself to be the future Duchess of Ashworth, and now you've discovered that position was never available." Venetia's face reddened. "I beg your pardon?" "You pursued a man who was never free to pursue you back. Not because of propriety or circumstance, but because his heart belonged to someone else. It belonged to me. Even when he believed lies about me. So even when he was too blind to see the truth. He never loved you, and he never would have." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Venetia's composure cracked. You common, scheming." "I'm common," Serene agreed calmly. "A merchant's granddaughter, as everyone loves to remind me. But I've scrubbed floors and survived poverty, and rebuilt myself from nothing, which is more than you could ever do. I've earned every scrap of dignity I possess. What have you earned, Miss Harcourt, besides the ability to smile prettily and insult people weaker than yourself?" Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Slowly. Deliberately. Others joined. Scattered applause building into something that sounded almost like approval. Venetia turned and fled. Hadrian was looking at Seren with an expression she couldn't quite name. Wonder, perhaps, or something deeper. "That," he said quietly, "was the woman I fell in love with. She's been hiding," Seren admitted, "for a long time. I'm glad she's back." The evening shifted after that. People who had avoided Seren's gaze now approached with tentative curiosity. Ladies who had whispered behind their fans offered careful conversation. The tide of public opinion, always fickle, seemed to be turning. But as the night wore on, Seren noticed something troubling. A footman she didn't recognize kept appearing at the edges of her vision, watching, waiting. She mentioned it to Hadrian during their second dance. The man in the gray livery, near the pillars. He's been following me all evening. Hadrian glanced casually in that direction. His expression darkened. That's not a Whitfield servant. I don't recognize the livery. Then who? A crash interrupted her. Screams erupted from the far side of the ballroom. Someone shouted, "Fire!" Chaos descended. In the confusion of bodies and smoke, Serene lost Hadrian's hand. People surged toward the exits, pushing, shoving, desperate to escape. A hand grabbed her arm, not Hadrian's. She turned and found herself face to face with the footman who'd been watching her. "Miss Whitley," he said, his grip painfully tight. "The Dowager Duchess sends her regards." Before she could scream, something pressed against her face. A cloth, a smell, sweet and chemical. Darkness swallowed her whole. Serene woke to candlelight and cold stone. Her head throbbed. Her wrists ached, bound behind her back with rough rope. The air smelled of damp earth and old wine. A cellar. She was in a cellar somewhere. Memory returned in jagged pieces. The ball, the fire, the footman. The Dowager sends her regards. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to think. "Ah, you're awake." The voice came from the shadows near the cellar stairs. A figure emerged, carrying a lantern that cast grotesque shadows across stone walls. Not the footman. Someone else. Someone she recognized. "Mr. Aldrich." The butler's name escaped her in a whisper of disbelief. "You?" "Me." He set down the lantern, his face impassive. The same face that had welcomed her to Thornhaven on her wedding day. The same face that had watched as she was cast out into the streets. "I'm sorry it came to this, Miss Whitley. Truly. You were always kind to the staff. You're working for her, so I'm the Dowager. I've worked for the Dowager for 37 years, long before the current Duke was born." Aldrich moved to a small table where papers were spread. "She saved me from debtor's prison when I was young, gave me a position, a purpose, a future. I owe her everything. She's a monster. She's a pragmatist." He picked up one of the papers, examining it in the lantern light. "You found the documents, the records of the financial arrangement. Unfortunate." "What arrangement? What was she paying for?" Aldrich set down the paper, his expression almost pitying. "The late Duke, His Grace's father. He wasn't as stable as the family presented. There were episodes, rages, periods of profound darkness. The old Dowager, his mother, wanted him committed to an asylum. It would have meant scandal. The end of the Blackmore line as anyone knew it." Serene's blood ran cold. "What does that have to do with the money?" "The current Dowager found a doctor, someone discreet, who could manage the situation privately. Treatments, medications, confinement when necessary, in comfortable quarters far from prying eyes." Aldrich shrugged. "It cost a great deal, and when the late Duke died, the payments should have ended. But they didn't. Why not? Because the doctor knew too much, because the records of what had been done could destroy the family if they ever came to light. So the payments continued. Hush money, I suppose you'd call it." Serene's mind raced. "That's what I discovered. The discrepancy in the accounts, the money going to an unnamed fund. You were getting too close, asking too many questions. The Dowager decided you needed to be removed before you unraveled everything." Aldrich's voice held no emotion. "The forged letters were simple enough. Lord Ashford was chosen precisely because the accusation was absurd. She assumed His Grace would investigate properly and discover the forgery. But he didn't. He was too proud, too jealous, too easily manipulated. He trusted his grandmother. Yes, a mistake. Footsteps echoed from the stairs. Another figure descended, slower, leaning heavily on an ebony cane. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. She looked older than Serene remembered, diminished somehow, though her eyes still burned with cold intelligence. "Leave us," she told Aldrich. "Wait upstairs." The butler obeyed without question. Silence filled the cellar, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in darkness. "You should have stayed gone." The Dowager's voice echoed against stone walls. "I gave you every opportunity. A ruined reputation, no resources, no connections. You should have disappeared into obscurity like any sensible woman would." "I did disappear. For 2 years. And then you came back." The Dowager moved closer, her cane tapping against the floor. "Right into my grandson's house. Right into his arms. Do you have any idea how much effort I've spent keeping him focused on appropriate matches? On women who would strengthen the Blackmore position instead of weakening it? You mean women you could control. I mean women who understood their place." The Dowager stopped before her. "You never understood yours. From the moment Hadrian brought you home, you were a threat, asking questions, making friends among the staff, treating servants like people instead of furniture. Is that a crime? It's dangerous. Servants talk. They observe. They notice things their betters would prefer to remain hidden." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Pemberton adores you. Half the household staff would walk through fire for your approval. Do you know how destabilizing that is to someone trying to maintain order?" Serene almost laughed. "You destroyed my life because the servants liked me. I destroyed your life because you were going to expose everything I'd spent decades protecting. The family's secrets, the financial arrangements, the truth about my son's illness." The Dowager's voice hardened. "The Blackmore name has survived for 400 years. I will not let a merchant's granddaughter bring it down. Hadrian knows. About the documents. About the conspiracy. Hadrian knows pieces, fragments, nothing that can be proven without those original documents." The Dowager smiled thinly. "Which you helpfully retrieved from their hiding place. They're in my possession now. By morning, they'll be ash." Cold dread settled in Serene's stomach. "What are you going to do with me?" "An accident, I think. The fire at the Whitfield ball was more extensive than anyone realized. A woman, confused by smoke and panic, wandered into an unsafe part of the building. A tragic loss. A fitting end. Hadrian will know. Hadrian will grieve, and eventually he'll recover. He'll marry someone appropriate. He'll produce heirs. And life will continue as it should." The Dowager turned toward the stairs. "I'm sorry, my dear. Truly. In another life, you might have made him happy. But some prices are simply too high to pay." She climbed the stairs slowly, leaving Serene alone in the darkness. The lantern's flame flickered. Soon it would burn out. And then there would be nothing but shadows and whatever end the Dowager had planned. Serene tested her bonds. The rope was tight, professional. Whoever had tied her knew what they were doing. But she'd spent 2 years surviving impossible circumstances. 2 years learning that giving up was never an option. She began to work at the knots. Hadrian had never known terror like this. The fire at the Whitfield ball had been a diversion. By the time the flames were extinguished and the guests accounted for, Serene had vanished. No one had seen her leave. No one knew where she'd gone, except that she hadn't gone willingly. He was certain of that. No, the footman. Calla paced the Whitfield drawing room, her face pale. The one she mentioned. Gray livery. Not a Whitfield servant. Hadrian's voice was barely controlled. Someone placed there specifically. Someone waiting for an opportunity. Grandmother. It has to be. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, breathless from her hurried journey from Thornhaven. "Your Grace, Mr. Aldrich is missing. He left the estate shortly after you departed for the ball. No one knows where he went. Aldrich, the butler who had served the family for decades, the butler who had been present through every scandal, every secret, every hidden arrangement. He's working for her, Hadrian said. He's been working for her all along. Your Grace, there's more. Mrs. Pemberton's hands twisted together. I did some looking. After you and Miss Seren began investigating. The payments you found in those documents. They went to a Dr. Erasmus Vane. He operates a private sanatorium near the coast, a place for wealthy families to hide inconvenient relatives. My father. Yes, Your Grace. During his difficult periods, the Dowager arranged everything. Pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She killed him. The words came out hollow. The sudden illness, the rapid decline. She couldn't risk him recovering, couldn't risk him revealing what had been done to him. I don't know, Your Grace, but I know she's capable of it. Hadrian grabbed his coat. Where is this sanatorium? Ravenswick, 3 hours by fast horse. Then I'm leaving now. Your Grace, you can't go alone. Then she'll kill Seren whether I'm there or not. He was already moving toward the door. Send word to the magistrate. Tell him everything. If I'm not back by morning, assume the worst and act accordingly. He rode into the darkness like a man possessed. 3 hours had never felt so long. The cellar door opened. Seren froze, her fingers bloody from working at the ropes. She'd made progress, loosened the bonds enough that she might slip free with time. Time she didn't have. But it wasn't the Dowager descending the stairs. It was Aldrich. Alone. She's sleeping, he said quietly. The journey exhausted her. She's not as young as she believes. Have you come to finish it yourself? The butler stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his features half hidden by shifting lantern light. I've served the Blackmore family my entire adult life. I've kept their secrets, protected their reputation, done things that would damn me in any court of heaven. He paused. But I never killed an innocent woman, and I don't intend to start now. He crossed to her and pulled a knife from his belt. Seren tensed, but instead of striking, he cut her bonds. The carriage house is 50 yards north. There's a horse saddled and ready. The main road is 2 miles east. Ride fast and don't look back. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why help me? Because you were kind to my sister. His voice cracked slightly. Agnes, the scullery maid with the crooked fingers. You paid for her to see a doctor when the Dowager would have dismissed her for being slow. You probably don't even remember. Seren did remember. So a small act of compassion, unremarkable at the time. Agnes died last winter, Aldrich continued. Fever. But she died in her own bed, in a warm room, because you intervened. She told me, before the end, that you were the only person in that house who ever saw her as human. He stepped back. Go. Now. Before she wakes. Seren rose on unsteady legs. What about you? I'll face what I've earned. But at least this time, I'll face it standing on the right side. She ran. The night air hit her lungs like ice. She found the carriage house, found the horse, mounted with trembling hands. Behind her, lights flickered in the main building. Voices rose. She kicked the horse into a gallop and fled into the darkness. Dawn was breaking when Seren reached the crossroads. She'd ridden through the night, pushing the horse to its limits, her mind churning with everything she'd learned. The Dowager's conspiracy, Aldrich's betrayal and redemption, the truth about Hadrian's father. She needed to reach Hadrian, needed to tell him everything. But where was he? The ball had descended into chaos. He could be anywhere. The road split before her, east toward London, north toward Thornhaven, west toward the coast. She chose north. An hour later, she crested a hill and saw riders approaching. For one terrible moment, she thought it was the Dowager's men. Then she recognized the lead horse, black as midnight, 17 hands tall. Hadrian. They met in the middle of the road, both dismounting at once, both reaching for each other with desperate hands. "You're alive," his voice broke on the words. "When you disappeared, I thought, I'm alive. Aldrich helped me escape. He's been working for your grandmother, but he turned at the end." "I know. I went to Ravenswick, the sanatorium. I found records, Seren, everything. What she did to my father, the payments, the cover-up." His face was gray with exhaustion and grief. "She killed him. My own grandmother killed my father to protect her secrets." "Hadrian, I confronted her an hour ago when I arrived at the cottage where she'd been keeping you. She confessed everything. Seemed almost proud of it." His laugh was bitter. 400 years of Blackmore honor, and it comes down to this. Murder, conspiracy, the destruction of everything decent. What happened to her? The magistrate has her in custody, and Aldrich. He went willingly. Hadrian's hands tightened on her arms. "I thought I'd lost you. When I couldn't find you at the ball, when no one knew where you'd gone, I thought, I'm here, I'm safe. Because of Aldrich. Because a butler had more conscience than my own family." He released her suddenly, stepping back, his face twisting. "You should go. You should take whatever money you need and disappear. Start over somewhere far from here, far from the Blackmore name and all its poison." "What?" "I'm toxic, Seren. My family is toxic. Everything we touch, we destroy. You deserve better than a lifetime of managing scandals and uncovering conspiracies and wondering what other horrors are buried in the family crypts." She stared at him, disbelief warring with hurt. "You're pushing me away. I'm setting you free." "I didn't ask to be set free. You should have." His voice cracked. 2 years ago, when I first accused you, and you should have cursed my name and walked out and never looked back. Instead, you loved me despite everything I did, and all it brought you was suffering. The morning sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Birds were singing. The world was continuing, indifferent to the hearts breaking on this empty road. "You're a coward," Seren said quietly. Hadrian flinched, as if she'd struck him. 2 years ago, you were a coward who believed lies because facing the truth was harder. And now you're being a coward again, pushing me away because letting me in is harder. She stepped toward him, her voice shaking. "I've already survived the worst you could do to me. I've survived poverty and degradation and the loss of everything I ever loved. And I'm still here, still standing, still choosing you, despite every reason not to. Serene? No, you don't get to make this decision for me. You don't get to decide what I deserve or what's best for me or whether the risk is worth taking." She jabbed a finger at his chest. "I decide. I choose. And I choose you, Hadrian Blackmore, with all your poison and your scandals and your monstrous grandmother. I choose this broken, damaged, impossible love, because it's mine. Because you're mine. Because I'm too stubborn and too proud and too in love to walk away now." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. "So either you accept that and stop trying to be noble, or you look me in the eyes and tell me you don't love me anymore. Tell me you don't want this. Tell me everything you said was a lie." Silence. The sun crept higher. The birds continued singing. "I can't tell you that," Hadrian whispered. "Then stop pushing me away. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need you." She grabbed his hands, pressing them against her chest. "Feel this. It's still beating. Despite everything, it's still beating for you. Don't throw that away because you're afraid of what might happen. Be afraid. Be terrified. But be terrified with me." He looked at their joined hands, at her tear-streaked face, at the impossible woman who refused to let him destroy himself. Then he pulled her into his arms and held on like he was drowning. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me. And I'm sorry. For everything. For the past. For just now. For every moment I failed you. Then stop failing me." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "Start now, and start today." "How?" She pulled back to look at him, her gaze unwavering. "Marry me." He stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. Marry me. Again. Properly this time. Not because of duty or social pressure or your grandmother's schemes. Marry me because you love me and I love you, and we've already survived the worst life can throw at us. Serin, the scandal alone. Let them talk. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. We'll be too busy being happy to notice." A laugh escaped him, incredulous and raw. "You're proposing to me, on the side of a country road, at dawn, after you've just escaped being murdered by my grandmother." "Yes," she smiled through her tears. "Is that a problem?" "No." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "No, it's not a problem at all." "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Again. Properly. Whenever and wherever you want." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and full of everything she'd been holding back for 2 years. And he kissed her back, his arms around her, his heart finally beginning to heal. The sun rose fully, flooding the road with golden light. It wasn't an ending, but it was a beginning. 3 weeks later, the trial of the Dowager Duchess began. It was the scandal of the century. Newspapers printed every salacious detail. Society matrons clutched their pearls and claimed they'd always known something was amiss. The courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the downfall of one of England's most formidable women. Serin attended every day, not for revenge, not for vindication, but because she needed to see it through, needed to watch the truth finally, publicly, irrevocably acknowledged. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Vane had kept meticulous records, and once confronted with the prospect of hanging for conspiracy to murder, he'd been remarkably forthcoming. The forged letters, the payments, the slow poisoning of the late Duke, everything laid bare under the cold light of justice. Hadrian testified on the 3rd day. He spoke of his father with quiet grief, of the grandmother he'd trusted, and the lies she'd fed him, of the wife he'd wronged, and the woman who'd forgiven him despite every reason not to. When he stepped down from the witness box, his eyes found Serin's in the crowd. She nodded once. Enough. The verdict came on the 5th day. Guilty. The Dowager was sentenced to spend her remaining years in comfortable confinement at a sanatorium of the Crown's choosing. The irony was not lost on anyone. The woman who had imprisoned her own son would now face the same fate. She walked from the courtroom with her head high, refusing to show weakness even in defeat. But when she passed Serin, she paused. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But you haven't. The scandal will follow you forever. Your children will be whispered about. Your grandchildren will carry this stain." Serin met her eyes without flinching. "Perhaps. But they'll also carry the truth, and that's more than you ever gave your own son." The Dowager's composure cracked, just slightly. Then she was led away, and the chapter closed. The wedding was small. Calla had wanted a grand affair, a public declaration that would silence every doubter. But Serin and Hadrian chose differently. Thornhaven's private chapel, close friends, and loyal staff only. A ceremony that was about love, not spectacle. Mrs. Pemberton wept joyfully the entire time. Aldrich, whose testimony had helped secure the conviction and earned him a reduced sentence, sent a letter of congratulations from his comfortable confinement. Calla served as witness, beaming through happy tears, and when Hadrian slipped the ring onto Seren's finger, his hands were steady and his voice was strong. I, Hadrian Blackmore, take you, Seren Whitley, to be my wife. Again. For the first time and the last time, in truth and in love. Forever. The words were simple, but they meant everything. That evening, they stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The roses had been replanted, new growth pushing up through autumn soil. The air was cool and clean, filled with the promise of renewal. My grandmother used to say that Blackmore men were cursed to love too deeply, Hadrian said quietly. That it made us vulnerable. Do you believe that? I used to think love was a weakness. He turned to face her, the sunset painting gold across his features. But you've taught me that love is the only strength that matters, the only thing worth fighting for. Careful, Seren smiled. You're becoming a romantic. Your influence, I'm afraid. You'll survive. More than survive. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I'll live, actually, truly live, for the first time in years. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when life gets hard, when scandals arise and enemies scheme, and the world tries to tear us apart, you won't shut me out. Ah, promise we'll face it together. I promise. He kissed her softly. Together. Always. The sun set over Thornhaven Manor, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside the house, servants were preparing dinner. Calla was writing letters to friends. The world was continuing, as it always did. But on the terrace, two people who had found their way back to each other stood wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that some loves were worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth everything. 6 months later, spring had returned to Thornhaven. The gardens were blooming. The household had settled into comfortable routine. Seren had taken up her role as Duchess with quiet confidence, earning respect from staff and neighbors alike. But one matter remained unresolved. Lady Thornwood had never apologized. More than that, she had continued her campaign of whispers and insinuations, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, but persistent enough to keep old wounds open. She's hosting a ball next month, Calla reported over breakfast. The invitations went out yesterday. Everyone who matters received one. Except us, Hadrian said dryly. Except us. Calla's expression was calculating. But I've been thinking, what if we don't need an invitation? Calla, hear me out. Lady Thornwood has been the loudest voice against Seren since the trial ended. If she can be silenced, the rest will follow. And I happen to know something about Lady Thornwood that she'd very much prefer stayed secret. Seren set down her teacup. What kind of something? Her daughter Honoria, the one you were kind to at your wedding breakfast. The one who wanted to be a botanist. Calla smiled. She's been secretly corresponding with a young scholar at Cambridge, a commoner. They're quite serious. How do you know this? Because Honoria and I have become friends. She's desperate to marry him, but her mother would never allow it. A match so far below their station? Calla shook her head. Lady Thornwood would rather die. Seren considered this. You're suggesting we use this information as leverage. I'm suggesting we offer Lady Thornwood a choice. Accept our presence in society gracefully, or watch her own daughter's secret romance become the scandal of the season. That's blackmail. That's politics. Calla's eyes were sharp. Lady Thornwood destroyed your reputation without a second thought. So I'm simply suggesting we give her a taste of what it feels like to be vulnerable. Hadrian was quiet, his expression thoughtful. Seren should decide, he said finally. This affects her most. Seren thought of all the whispered insults, the cut directs, the knowing looks and pitying glances. Lady Thornwood hadn't invented the scandal, but she'd certainly profited from it. But she also thought of Honoria, a shy girl who dreamed of botany and had found love with an unsuitable man. No, she said quietly. Calla's face fell. No? Not like this. Seren rose, moving to the window. Lady Thornwood deserves consequences, but Honoria doesn't deserve to be a pawn in her mother's destruction. Then what do you suggest? Seren turned, her expression resolute. I'll confront her directly, at her own ball, and without an invitation. The Thornwood ball was a glittering affair. Seren arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that matched the famous Blackmore jewels at her throat. Hadrian walked beside her, his presence a statement in itself. The footman at the door gaped. Your Grace, he stammered. You're not on the guest list. The Duke and Duchess of Ashworth are never on lists, Hadrian said calmly. We simply arrive. They walked past him before he could recover. The ballroom fell silent as they entered. Every eye turned toward them. Whispers erupted. Lady Thornwood appeared from the crowd, her face a mask of controlled fury. Your Grace. What an unexpected honor. Lady Thornwood. Serene's voice carried clearly. I believe we have unfinished business. I can't imagine what you mean. Can't you? Seren stepped closer, her voice dropping but still audible to those nearby. For 2 years, you've spread poison about me, in drawing rooms and at dinner parties, through whispered asides and pointed silences. You've used my suffering to elevate yourself, and you've done it without a shred of evidence. I merely repeated what everyone knew, what everyone believed, based on lies manufactured by a woman now convicted of murder. Seren's eyes were steel. The Dowager is gone, Lady Thornwood. Her conspiracy is public record, and yet you continue to whisper, to suggest, to imply. Why? Lady Thornwood's composure cracked. Because some things are simply true, regardless of legal proceedings. You were never appropriate for the Duke. Your breeding, on your background. My background is exactly as common as I ever claimed it to be. I never pretended to be anything I wasn't. Seren's voice rose slightly. But you pretend constantly. To virtue you don't possess, to moral authority you haven't earned, to superiority based on nothing but accident of birth. The crowd was utterly silent. I could destroy you, Seren continued quietly. I have information that would end your social standing overnight, but I won't use it. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I refuse to become the kind of person you are. Lady Thornwood's face had gone pale. What I want is simple. Stop. Stop the whispers, the insinuations, the pointed comments. Accept that I am the Duchess of Ashworth, that my marriage is legitimate, and that your opinion of my breeding is entirely irrelevant. Serene smiled coldly. So do that, and we can coexist? Fail to do that, and I will make sure that every salon in London knows exactly what kind of woman you truly are. A weighted pause hung between them. Then, slowly, Lady Thornwood curtsied. Your Grace, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Welcome to my ball. Serene inclined her head graciously. Thank you, Lady Thornwood. What a lovely gathering. She took Hadrian's arm and walked past, head high, shoulders squared. Victory. 1 year later, the first anniversary of their second wedding arrived. Hadrian had been planning something for weeks, refusing to reveal details despite Calla's wheedling and Seren's curiosity. All he would say was that they needed to be dressed for an evening out. The carriage took them to London, to the Royal Opera House. Seren's breath caught as she recognized the building. Hadrian, do you remember? His voice was soft. "Our first season. I brought you here to see your first opera. You were so nervous you could barely sit still." I remember. Her chest ached with emotion. "We sat in your grandmother's box. She glared at me the entire time. Tonight, we sit in our own box. No grandmother, no schemes. Just you and me and the music." They entered the opera house hand in hand, drawing glances and whispers. But these were different whispers than before. Admiring, curious, respectful. The Duke and Duchess of Ashworth. A love story that had survived scandal, betrayal, and resurrection. Their box was draped in fresh flowers. Champagne waited on ice. And when the lights dimmed and the music swelled, Seren found herself transported back to that first evening, when she'd been young and hopeful and desperately in love with a man she barely knew. "I have something for you," Hadrian murmured during the intermission. He pressed a small velvet box into her hands. Inside was a ring, not elaborate or ostentatious, but simple and elegant, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "My father gave it to her on their first anniversary. He told her it matched her eyes." "Hadrian, I know the Blackmore family jewels are grander, but this one is real. It represents real love, real sacrifice, and real joy." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Like us." Tears slipped down Serene's cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much. I love you too, today and tomorrow and every day after." He kissed her gently and unhurried and full of certainty. Oh, no matter what scandals arise or enemies scheme or the world throws at us. Together? Together. Always. The music resumed, filling the opera house with beauty. And in their private box, two people who had survived the worst sat wrapped in each other's arms, finally, completely happy. 3 years later, the nursery at Thornhaven was bright with morning sunshine. Seren sat in the rocking chair, her daughter cradled in her arms. Theodora Marguerite Blackmore, named for no one in particular, a fresh start for a family that had earned one. "She has your eyes," Hadrian said from the doorway. "And your stubbornness. I prefer to call it determination." He crossed to them, kneeling beside the chair, one hand reaching out to touch his daughter's tiny fingers. "I used to think this house was a mausoleum," he said quietly. "Beautiful but empty, or full of secrets and silence. And now it is home." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Because of you. Because you refused to give up. Because you loved me even when I made it nearly impossible." "You made it difficult," Serene corrected gently. "Never impossible." Theodora stirred, making small noises of contentment. "What do you think she'll be?" Hadrian asked. "When she grows up?" "Whatever she wants. A botanist, perhaps. Or a scholar. Or a duchess who changes the world." "Not a merchant's granddaughter," Serene laughed. "That too. The best parts of all of us." Hadrian leaned in and kissed her, gentle and unhurried, and full of certainty. Outside the window, Thornhaven's gardens were in full bloom. Calla was teaching Honoria Thornwood, now happily married to her Cambridge scholar, about the medicinal properties of roses. Mrs. Pemberton was overseeing the household with practiced care. The world was continuing, as it always did. But inside the nursery, 3 people sat together in a patch of sunlight, a family forged through fire and reborn in love. And somewhere, in a comfortable room far from London, an old woman stared out a window and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. She would wonder for the rest of her days. But for the Blackmores, the wondering was over. They had their answers. They had each other. And that was more than enough.